The Retelling of the Metamorphosis by Franz Kafka. We decided to tell the Metamorphosis from the point of view of Greta, the younger sister of Gregor. We find out she's 17 years old and she is a violinist. We are retelling the Metamorphosis through Greta's journal entries. This is all from her point of view. Entry 1. I sat watching my parents' worried faces as they tried to coax Edgar out of his room. It was unusual for my brother to be late for work, and with every attempt my parents made, another minute ticked away. After my father's attempt failed, I decided to give it a try, hoping that my brother would at least listen to me. I had asked Gregor if he was unwell, and he replied, "Just a second." I was relieved to hear my dear brother's voice and expected him to be out in no time. Unfortunately, there was still no sign of Gregor leaving his room. It was almost 7:15, and he has yet to make a single sound. Minutes later, Gregor's general manager came in, demanding to see Gregor. I began to worry for my brother's sake and wished he would come out this instant. I ran to Gregor to inform him of the general manager's arrival, but I received no response. I ran to my room, wanting to avoid any sort of confrontation between Gregor and his manager. As soon as I closed my door, I could no longer contain my tears and began to cry over Gregor's actions. Something serious was wrong with him. The Gregor in that room isn't the Gregor that I know. Gregor would never ignore his responsibilities, knowing how much our family is in debt. It hurt me to know that my brother was silently suffering. I heard mother call for me and immediately attended to her. I was expecting to see Gregor, but instead I faced the locked door. Father had sent my mother and I to fetch the doctor and locksmith as an attempt to get Gregor out of his room. As I finish this entry, I will be off in hopes of finding someone to help Gregor. Entry 2. Much to my delight, Gregor had finally opened his door. However, the moment I came back home, I could tell that the mood had shifted from being worried to discomfort. I approached mother, who was sitting silently at the dining room table, to ask her of Gregor's status. The moment Gregor's name escaped my lips, my mother let out an uncontrollable sob, muttering, "He's changed," every so often. I looked over to my father, who was standing by the window, and saw his angered and disappointed face. I had no idea why my parents were so uncomfortable with Gregor, until my mother began muttering, "He's an insect, a vermin," as she let out another sob. My father had to explain to me what had happened to Gregor. My dear brother was now an insect, and my life has suddenly become more complicated. I decided to pour milk and some scraps of bread into a bowl for Gregor. If what my parents said was true, I wasn't prepared to see him yet. There have been many changes around the household lately. My father no longer reads us the afternoon paper in his dramatic voice. I miss the tradition dearly and hope time will inspire father to continue. Later on, I tried to muster up the courage to see Gregor. My first attempt was successful. I decided to try again tomorrow.
Entry 3. The next morning, I attempted to see Gregor once again. Once I opened the door, I anxiously cast a glance over Gregor's room in hopes to see him. I noticed a movement under the settee and saw him. In shock, I slammed the door and immediately regretted it. I was still his sister, even if he has changed. I needed to be there for him. I tiptoed into the room. I was careful of where I stood, keeping my gaze downward. I was shocked to see the bowl I had left for him last night so full, so I grabbed the nearest rag I could and took the bowl away. I threw the leftovers away and created an assortment of foodstuffs and a bowl of water for Gregor to have. I hoped his food assortment would satisfy his needs. I placed the food in his room and I quickly exited and locked the door, assuming he would not eat in front of me. I was still very confused about the whole situation. After a couple of minutes, I decided to check up on Gregor to see if he had touched the food. Not wanting to frighten him, I slowly turned the key in the door, and to my surprise, most of the food was gone. So I grabbed a broom to sweep up the mess and the leftovers to throw away. Entry 4. Over the course of a few days, many changes were made around the house. Every day I became more accustomed to Gregor's state and found myself going into his room often. Every meal was centered around my parents' worry about finances and how to comfort ourselves in the household. Due to the changes, I was forced to do cooking in concerts with my mom. I now have less time to play my beloved violin as I wanted to around the house all the time. My parents were very worried about our financial situation, and if it wasn't for Gregor, we wouldn't be here. I would still be able to play my violin. Lately, I have been becoming more and more frustrated with Gregor's situation. It gets harder and harder to look at him, and I feel like I have given up my youth to take care of him. I feel like a babysitter. I'm only 17, and the future for me doesn't seem very good.
Entry 5. It has been over a month since Gregor's metamorphosis, and I can tell that my parents appreciate all my hard work. My mother had mentioned wanting to visit Gregor, but Father and I decided it wasn't the right time. I went in Gregor's room to find that he was hanging from the ceiling as entertainment. I wanted to move the furniture around so it wouldn't get in his way. Unfortunately, the furniture proved rather heavy to move on my own. My father and maid would never agree to help, so my only option was my mother. I had assured my mother that she would not see him. My mother and I began to move the furniture out to give Gregor more room to roam. My mother was hesitant to move Gregor's furniture out, but I had assured her that this was the best thing to do. Upon entering the room again, I spot Gregor on the wall and try to prevent my mother from entering the room. However, it was too late, and my mother let out a scream and fainted on the couch. I turn around and yell, "You, Gregor!" At this moment, I saw an insect, not my brother. I quickly go to retrieve the medicine from my mother, but in my attempt, Gregor startled me, making me drop one of the medicine bottles. In anger, I slammed the door, not allowing Gregor in. Later, my father arrived, and I had informed him that Gregor escaped and that mother had fainted. My father spots Gregor and charges at him, which prompts me to run away from the scene. After hearing a lot of commotion, I peek outside to see my father pinning Gregor to the floor and my mother pleading to spare his life. Entry 6. A month after the altercation with Gregor, I was employed as a salesgirl and helped my family with their debt, which has gotten much worse. My mother had the nerve to clean Gregor's room today, which angered me beyond belief. I confronted my mother, yelling at her about it being my job to look after Gregor. To my dismay, my father got involved, yelling at both my mother and I, which left me sobbing at the table. After some time, 3 boarders came to live in our home. In order to make room for them, we had begun to use Gregor's room as a storage room. One night, my mother and I made meat and potatoes for dinner. After dinner, the boarders asked me to play the violin for them. It had been quite some time since I last played and was very delighted to be given the opportunity to do so. Just for this night, I wasn't concerned for Gregor. Tonight was the night I could enjoy myself. My joy was cut short when one of the boarders yelled for my father while pointing at Gregor. I was infuriated with Gregor, and I had enough of him getting in the way of my life. That insect was not my brother. It was just vermin that needed to get rid of. I demanded my parents to get rid of the monster we had been stuck with. I wanted that insect gone. I wanted him out of my life. The moment he retreated to his room brought me immense amounts of joy. Entry 7. It was brought to my attention that it has died. Not long after, my family and I boarded a trolley for the country. Things were changing for the better. We were free. I stood up and stretched and walked towards a new beginning.